This is the Highly Sensitive Club, episode number 38.
Have you been told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, or too much? Do you have big feelings and deep thoughts you don't always know what to do with? I'm Stephanie Lynn, a certified life coach and highly sensitive person. I've helped dozens of highly sensitive clients feel more energized, more confident, and more in control of their high sensitivity. In these episodes, you'll get the information and inspiration to level up your life as a highly sensitive person too. Welcome to the Highly Sensitive Club.
Hello, highly sensitive person, and welcome to this week's episode of the Highly Sensitive Club. We are talking about vulnerability. Many of you, much like me, are probably not super jazzed about feeling vulnerable. And unfortunately, the only way to move forward with most things is to be a little bit vulnerable, because on the other side of vulnerability is where all of the good stuff lives. So I'm walking my talk today, annoyingly, and I'm going to share some things vulnerably because I think that they will be helpful for you. And full disclosure, I have a little bit of an outline for this episode, but I don't necessarily know where this is going to go. It's going to be vulnerable. It's going to be messy, but my belief is that I can help someone. So if that someone is you today, that is the whole point of this episode. First, I have to thank my mentee, Selena, who had an excellent mentor session with me this morning. Mentees coach me as their mentor on an actual topic that I want to be coached on in my life. And after the session, I give them feedback as the recipient of their coaching on areas where they have superpowers and they're doing really well and areas where they can improve. I was struggling during the session because I didn't know what to talk about today. I have a very high value around following through on things and honoring my commitments. I have had an episode go out every week for this podcast for the last 37 weeks. And it's really important to me to keep being consistent and to keep showing up for you, because it's really easy for us as highly sensitive people to give up and to quit when it starts to get difficult or when we don't know what to do. And I am determined not to do that. I'm going to keep showing up week after week, even if I don't know what to talk about. So I brought that to my mentor session this morning. And the thing that was getting in my way was a lot of worry about whether I could find something that would resonate with you, whether I could find a relevant topic, whether it would be helpful or whether it would be of service or if it would be messy. I had this old rule that worrying was productive. This may resonate with you because for a lot of us highly sensitive people, we think about things and we process things and we try to anticipate all the ways that something could go wrong because it makes us feel like we're in control of the situation. And it makes us feel like if we anticipate things, we can prepare for them in advance and then we will never be caught off guard and nothing will ever go wrong. Of course, this is very likely not the case for most things. It's wonderful to prepare. I think most of us feel better when we're prepared. And you can't prepare for everything. So I discovered that worrying was not productive. And in fact, I was using all of my creative energy to create my worries instead of creating a podcast episode for you. The mentor session was so powerful because Selena helped me tap into a deeper value that I have, which is connection. The whole reason that I share and the whole reason that I have this podcast is to help you. I think all of these things on my own, just as I'm sure you're processing things on your own all the time. I don't have to make a podcast in order to do my processing. I do the podcast in order to help you figure out a new perspective for yourself and to do some of your processing and to see things in a different way. Because if there's something that I've learned that I think could be helpful for you, I want to share that because I want to connect. This podcast and this channel is called the Highly Sensitive Club because I want you to know that there is a place where you are welcome as a highly sensitive person. It doesn't always feel that way, and you might not feel like being a highly sensitive person is a gift. So I want you to know that you have a place, that you are welcome here, that you're not alone, and that there are always ways to change the things that are not working in your life and to make them better. I actually got a little teary thinking about connecting with you and sharing things that might be helpful for your life. So thank you, Selena, for a wonderful mentor session. And now let's talk about being vulnerable. Of course, being the English major that I am, looked up the definition of vulnerability, which according to Oxford Languages is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. Isn't that interesting? Vulnerable means that there's a possibility that someone might disagree with you and they might say something that you don't like or that makes you feel a certain way. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not something that you can or should do. So I will rephrase this in a way that I find helpful. Vulnerability is making yourself open to being hurt. This, however, does not mean that it's not worthwhile or that you can't pick and choose who you're vulnerable with. One of the inspirations for this episode is the episode that I did 2 weeks ago on boundaries. There are certain people with whom you do not want to be vulnerable because they haven't earned your trust. And there are ways that you can be vulnerable where you're not exposing every single thing about yourself. You can be vulnerable with people without feeling like you are a victim or you're venting or you're just laying everything out on the table. Vulnerability is the willingness to be uncomfortable. It's approaching things with an open heart and an open mind, knowing that yes, you might get hurt, but it's worth the risk in order to get a reward on the other side. Being vulnerable means letting things be messy or letting them be incomplete, letting things be enough instead of optimal. If you are not letting yourself be vulnerable, you are probably avoiding being uncomfortable. You're probably approaching things with a defensiveness, which makes everything feel like a fight, even if you don't mean to show up that way. And it might be that you are not letting things be messy or incomplete, and you're very, very focused on everything having to be perfect and everything having to be complete before you share it. For highly sensitive people or HSPs, this makes sense because we are the 20% of the population that looks first and leaps later. We might be very prone to action, but that doesn't mean that we're not thinking them through and preparing ourselves in order to make that leap. We also tend to have very high standards, and that means for a lot of us that we struggle with perfectionism. So, of course, it feels very scary to be vulnerable. A lot of us feel pressure to perform because when we look out into the world, we see a lot of people who appear to be very polished. When we're on social media and when we are looking at YouTube videos or checking things out on Instagram, we are seeing people's best versions. And we don't necessarily see all of the messy stuff that gets left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. So we put this pressure on ourselves to perform at this very high level. And we think that anything that we show before it's complete or before it's of a high standard is not worthy of people's attention. There's this idea that the only thing that's worthy of sharing are the positive things or the accomplishments that you have in your life. And so it feels very scary to share things that are not super positive and not super polished with other people. I face this myself, and I'm actually going through this trying to figure out how I want to show up on social media. Because for many of you, and I've talked to a lot of highly sensitive people, we tend to be in one of two camps. A lot of highly sensitive people who are very interested and very active on social media also have ADHD because it meets that high stimulation quotient and that high level of sensation that you might be looking for. If you are of the other camp, however, which I have been at various points in my life too, you've probably completely withdrawn and dismissed social media in general. A lot of highly sensitive people I know are not involved in social media at all. You might be one of those people who has an account and maybe you use it to check in with other people, but you're very reticent and you're very reluctant to share your thoughts and your updates with other people, especially if things are not going well in your life. There's this tendency to compare your chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 10 or 15 and to feel like you're not allowed to share the beginnings of your journey because you're not as far along as someone else. The unfortunate part is that you can't move to that part if you don't go through all of the other stuff moving up to it. There are 5 ways that you as a highly sensitive person have probably figured out how to bypass vulnerability and to look like you're moving forward and to look like you're sharing with other people without actually being vulnerable, without opening yourself up to the possibility of being hurt or of someone thinking a way about you that you don't want them to. The first way that this might show up is by problem solving. You might be one of those people who processes a lot of things, you know exactly what the problem is, and you're trying to come up with solutions all by yourself without giving the other person time to process too. This comes from a desire to have a complete solution before you bring anything to other people. And it's this idea that you have to have this complete, perfect package before you can share it with anyone. This probably gets you into trouble because it makes you impatient when the other person might be defensive or they might have other opinions that differ from you. Disagreement might feel very scary, or if they have emotions that you aren't comfortable with when you share what you think is the solution, it might be very hard for you to be present and to be patient and not to take things personally because you've done all this processing on your own and you haven't given enough time to the other person to do it too. Number two is that you are probably avoiding being vulnerable if you are prioritizing productivity over rest. Productivity goes along with this high achiever persona or mask that many of us wear as highly sensitive people, and many of us in general wear. Allowing yourself to rest is one of the main ways that you need to be vulnerable, highly sensitive person, because you need more rest than average. You probably need 8 to 10 hours of sleep. You need way more time by yourself in order to process things than the average person. And you need way more time to sit with all of the input that you've taken in throughout the day that other people simply don't need. You know that you are not being vulnerable with yourself or with others if you're constantly focused on being productive and you are not allowing yourself adequate rest. And whatever you think is adequate, probably add on 10 to 20% more because that's likely what you need as a highly sensitive person. The third sign that you are avoiding vulnerability is that you are not allowing yourself to be and you're always focused on doing. This is very similar to prioritizing productivity or accomplishment over rest, but this has to do with always having to be active, even to the point that you are always thinking and you're not allowing yourself to just be present. If you struggle with meditation, this is one of those skills that you want to learn. And it's one of those ways that you're avoiding being vulnerable. Because if you stop thinking and if you stop doing, then you suddenly are faced with yourself. And that can be an extremely vulnerable experience. It's a skill and a practice that you can develop and you can learn. The fourth way that you might be bypassing vulnerability as a highly sensitive person, that you don't take the time to decide what you want, but you're very familiar with what you don't want. If you have had an experience where you wanted something and then you felt very disappointed when it didn't happen, maybe this has occurred many times throughout your life. You might have come up with a coping mechanism where you convinced yourself it wasn't worth it to want things because it wasn't worth it to face the disappointment if you didn't get the thing that you wanted. So you just taught yourself that it's much safer not to want things than to allow yourself the desire or the vision and then to follow through on it, even if you don't get it. You might be very familiar with all of the things that you don't want in your life and all of the things that are not going well, but you might have a really hard time expressing specifically what you do want. This could be a sign that you are avoiding vulnerability. And the fifth way that you might be avoiding and bypassing vulnerability is by following cycles because they're habitual and they're familiar, but knowing that they don't work. You know that it's broken, and so you want to fix it, but you're so overwhelmed with the idea of trying to figure out how to fix it that you just keep going through the same old motions over and over again, even though you know that they're not working. This could also be a sign that you are avoiding being vulnerable. The antidote to all 5 of these challenges of problem solving without letting other people in, of focusing on productivity and deprioritizing rest, of always having to do and never allowing yourself to just be present, of knowing exactly what you don't want, but not taking the time to figure out what you do want, and of following broken cycles that you know are not working, but you do them anyway because they're familiar. The antidote to all of these is courage. Here's what courage actually looks like in the face of discomfort and fear. It's the willingness to let things land at 80%. I know you have high standards. I know you know what 100% is. I know that sometimes you have even hit your 100% satisfaction and it has gone perfectly the way that you envisioned. However, most things don't end up that way. And when you're so focused on getting to your 100%, you're not allowing any wiggle room to be creative or to have things that you didn't expect influence you so that it might actually be better than you envisioned in the first place. Courage involves the willingness to let things land at 80% and then be okay with that. It's the willingness to be uncomfortable. It's the willingness to learn and to make mistakes along the way. So many of us don't want to take an action step unless we're 100% certain that we can get it right the first time. This is not being vulnerable, and this is not having courage. And I'm betting that if this is your approach, you probably procrastinate a lot. You probably procrasti-learn a lot. You're very busy trying to get certifications or read another book or listen to another podcast or get another program under your belt because you're afraid to take that action. Being vulnerable means having the courage to take the action and to learn by taking it, not by trying to absorb all of the information before you even get started. This is usually where you will get stuck. Courage is the willingness to be messy. It's the willingness to let things not be perfect, which I know is very hard when we have these high standards. But if you can let things be messy, that is the way that you can really truly connect with people, because most people are messy. Even the people who have super polished social media accounts and these perfect videos, they have a lot of help and they have a lot of support. And in order to get to that place and all of that success, they had to go through the messy middle. This is non-negotiable. Things have to be messy as you are learning and growing in order for you to get where you want to be. So you have to have the courage to let things be messy and not look as perfect and polished as you would like them to be. I find it reassuring when I see old videos of people that I follow that I admire, because they're being in the moment that they're in. And I really look forward to looking back on my videos and the recordings that I'm sharing now and thinking I was being fully exactly where I was in that moment. And now I'm so happy that I have other options and I have better lighting and I have better camera and I have all of these additional things. I have to go through this period in order to get to that period where I'm the polished professional version that I want to be. It's the same for you. Someone is looking at what you're sharing and you are exactly where they need you to be in order to receive the message that you're trying to share. Another way that you can be vulnerable and courageous is to be willing to be in the process, not in the result. Being stuck on the result keeps you from being in this moment and in this part of the process. It takes courage to be present. It takes courage to be okay with where you are right now. It takes courage to enjoy the journey along the way and to be okay with wherever you are, whether or not you ever get to the destination. And you can be courageous by being willing to do difficult, unfamiliar tasks. Most things that we start and learn for the first time are difficult and unfamiliar. We are not as capable as we want to be, and we're not as competent as we want to be. That doesn't mean that it's not worth it to go through the unfamiliarity and the discomfort and to do difficult things, because that's the only way they're going to become easier. You can't outthink yourself and you can't outlearn your way through difficult things. You have to be willing to face them and have that courage in order to get to the place that you are competent, that you do have excellence, that you are really, really good at things. Here's how this can look in your life when you're willing to be more courageous. In your relationships, you can process with the people in your life and share more of what's going on in your internal states. If you're used to packaging up your feelings in these neat little packages before you share them with people, this is going to be a growth area for you. However, it's going to help you connect. It's going to create depth. It's going to allow space for other people to be vulnerable with you. When other people are vulnerable with you, that is when you can help them the most. That's when you can use your intuition and your insights. That's when you can show up and really be the kind of person that you want to be. If you aren't being vulnerable with other people in your life, they never have the opportunity to be vulnerable with you. In your occupation, and this could be a full-time job, this could be a business or a side gig that you own, or this could simply be projects or things that you put your energy into in your life. If you're not being vulnerable in your occupation, you are probably getting stuck in perfectionism. You're procrasti-learning and procrasti-researching and trying to anticipate all of the things that could go wrong before you take an action. This is keeping you stuck, and it's probably why you have projects you haven't completed despite having them on your to-do list for years. It's why your dreams are not coming true. Writing a book or publishing a YouTube channel or going out and becoming a speaker. Whatever it is that's making you excited, if you are not being vulnerable, you're keeping yourself stuck and you're keeping yourself from meeting that vision. You have to be vulnerable with others and with yourself in order to move towards that dream. If you are not being vulnerable in your health, this means that you are not asking for assistance. You might not be going to the doctor. You might not be exercising and moving your body. It means that you might not be honest with yourself about which foods feel good for you and which ones don't. If you're not being vulnerable about your health with yourself and with people who can support you, then it is much harder to take care of yourself and you're keeping yourself stuck. In money, if you're not vulnerable with yourself first and foremost about where your money is going, how you're spending it, if it's being used the way that you want it to, are you keeping as much as you want to? Are you using your money to create the life that you want? Same goes for time. Are you using your time and spending your time the way that you want? Being vulnerable means being honest with yourself. It means sharing that with people that you trust and asking for support. It means hiring people who can help you make the progress that you want to make with your money and with your time so that you're using your two most precious resources to the best of your abilities. And last but not least, leisure, rest, play, fun, whatever word resonates for you. If you are not being vulnerable in this area of your life, you are going to burn out if you are not burned out already. I say this from a place of complete empathy because I have made every single one of these mistakes. I have bypassed my vulnerability in every conceivable way possible. I have kept myself stuck in every area of my life because I was unwilling to be vulnerable. And how this looked for me was an unwillingness to be uncomfortable. It was an unwillingness to dive into things before I felt 1000% prepared. And it was an unwillingness to be open and to do things messy because I was afraid about sharing those messy pieces with the people in my life, let alone with people I didn't know. So I can say from experience, because this is something that I'm working on regularly, and this is the moral of the mentor session that I had this morning with Selena, vulnerability is strength. This is the new rule that I came up with. Vulnerability is valuable and vulnerability is true strength because anyone can put on a mask. It's very easy for us to wear personas. As highly sensitive people, it is so easy for us to figure out what the rules are that other people are setting up for us and to follow those rules and to win at their game. It is much harder and therefore makes you a much stronger, more resilient person to be able to create your own rules and follow those. It makes you a much stronger person to expose yourself to the possibility of being hurt and of feeling uncomfortable than it is to try and pretend like everything is fine. It is much easier to just be productive because most of us were taught to prioritize being productive over taking care of ourselves, taking care of our relationships, having fun, allowing ourselves time to rest. It is much more challenging for you to be vulnerable with your free time and to allow yourself time to play or to have fun or just to simply rest. I have an episode about the 4 kinds of rest that are helpful for a highly sensitive person. I am coming around to the idea that in order to be as strong as I want to be, that means being vulnerable. And I still have some coaching to do on this, but I wanted to share this today because as a highly sensitive person, we feel things deeply. We care deeply about other people. We notice all of those little nuances that can tell us when someone disapproves of something that we say or do or think. So it makes us very sensitive to being vulnerable. It feels scarier for us to be vulnerable because the uncomfortable emotions that come up with being vulnerable feel so much more intense for us. And that's why it is so important for us to learn how to be vulnerable and to have the courage to try these things, because there is nothing we can do in our lives with true fulfillment and with true meaning and with true depth if we're not being vulnerable. I hope that what I've shared with you today has been helpful for you and has brought up some new insights for you. How can you show up and be more vulnerable this week? Which area of your life do you want to focus on? Is there a person in your life where you can practice being more vulnerable and sharing things before you've processed it fully all the way through? Is there a project where you can try something and experiment without knowing exactly how to do things perfectly the first time? Can you be honest with yourself about the way that you're spending your money or your time or the way that you're treating your health and your body or your free time so that you can change in the direction you want to? If you like what you're hearing today and you are just a few steps behind me, I would love to help you. As I'm learning, I can then turn around and help you process these things for yourself and to learn what works for you. Because just because I think vulnerability equals value and it equals strength doesn't mean that's the perfect thought for you. However, I can help you find the perfect thought for you. If you're interested, go to stephanielynn.com and book a consultation call with me. It's a free conversation, and I can help you figure out where vulnerability needs to show up more in your life and help you make a plan so that you can move forward and start to incorporate it. This is a really, really important skill for all of us to learn. It's something that is even more difficult with all of the access to information and people's opinions that we have now. So it is even more crucial for you as a highly sensitive person to access your vulnerability. It's the way that you're going to connect. It's the way that you're going to live out your purpose. It's the way that you're going to create more meaning in your life. Thank you so much for listening or watching this week's episode of the Highly Sensitive Club. I hope you got a lot out of it. Please leave a comment below or like, review, and subscribe so that other highly sensitive people can find this too. There are so many of us, and this club is open to all. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next one.
Thanks for listening. If you're ready to take what you learned today to the next level, head over to StephanieLynn, that's LINN.com, and book a consultation call to get started. I can't wait to see you there, my dear HSP.